Well, I guess we'll get started. It's just almost 7:05 and maybe people come in late. Yeah, most of y'all know who I am. I'm Debbie Fabian, current president of Tackles. Even though my picture there says Claude Rector, I am really Debbie Fabian. I signed on as Claude. Most of you probably know our illustrious speaker, and we're so proud of able to have our own, I call it my own, because I'm an alumni of Texas State or Southwest Texas, our own Dr. Rodney Rohde, and he is the professor, research dean, and chair of the CLS program at the College of Health Professions of Texas State University, formerly known as Southwest Texas. I have to get that in there. So that's what my degree says. But anyway, he has a varied background, but I'm going to make it short and sweet. He's been very busy, like he said, for some of y'all that just joined during this crazy time. He's done lots of interviews. While it's a sad time, I love what you said. It's also an exciting and rewarding time to be able to share our message of clinical laboratory science. And he has done many different publications, interviews, and he even did one for Chinese news television. And I'll share that link later tonight to the Tackles Facebook page. Okay.
Great.
So Dr. Rodney, if you're ready to get started, we'll let you get going.
I'm ready. Thank you so much, Debbie, for that nice introduction. It is definitely a joy and an honor to do this for you guys. I was thinking the other day, I think this is my 18th or 19th year with Tackles and ASCLS. So kind of coming full circle here with respect to being involved in really a public health emergency, kind of at the intersection with the medical laboratory and healthcare field. So let's get started. Tonight, I want to discuss, obviously, we're going to talk about the COVID pandemic, but I'm going to come across several different topics. And just a little bit of background here. Going to come at it from the standpoint of giving you an update from the standpoint of where we are now and talking about how we, obviously we reached a dangerous tipping point and we went over that tipping point this past year. And also discussing the diverse and novel pathogens part of it, as well as kind of looking forward at any emerging pathogens that may be coming our way. Here's the objectives that I'm going to try to get through tonight. I want a quick update. I'm going to give you just a brief commentary about what we did at Texas State University, because I sat on a presidential appointed couple of committees, one associated with health and wellness and one associated with research activities. So I'm just going to give you a few slides to talk about that. Obviously, I want to talk about treatments and vaccines. And then these last 2 points really are going to get into the kind of some of the virus, the variants and the virus evolution that's been going on lately, as well as how that might affect the different testing modalities as well as the vaccines, and then a look at emerging pathogens down the road. So it seems like forever ago now. I remember in December of 19, and I'm always keeping an eye on things through CDC and some of the ProMed email list serves that I follow, and we started hearing about this pneumonia-like illness coming out of Wuhan, China. And so I remember telling my wife and friends, let's just keep some perspective and kind of watch what's happening. It doesn't seem to be breaking out, yet. And the story, within a month or so, we had our first case show up in Seattle, Washington. And from that point on, it just kind of ran really uncontrolled for many months, including when we started shutting down the US. So I'll talk about some of that in retrospect. But I did want to point out, in case any of our audience doesn't know this, I'm sure most of you do know this, but sometimes in the general public, I make sure to point this out, that SARS-CoV-2 is the actual virus name, and COVID-19 is the designation for the infection or the disease. So CO is for corona, VI is for virus, D is for disease, and 19, of course, is the year it was kind of named. So if you don't know much about the family of coronaviruses, they're actually everywhere. In fact, I would pretty much say that most of us have had dozens of infections with these just from being kind of a common cold. It's the second leading cause of the common cold. Rhinoviruses are the number one leading virus family that cause the common cold. And about 10 to 30% of colds globally are caused by this virus. And it's primarily an airborne transmitted agent through respiratory droplets. If you didn't know, there's about 7 of these. The first 4 listed here, without reading all this crazy nomenclature, are really the common cold variety. And then you've probably heard of SARS-CoV. That was the original in 2003 that I literally was just coming into academia. I just left the Department of Health and doing some CDC work, and we actually followed SARS, the first one. And then in 12 and 13, we played around with MERS a little bit. That was first in camels and then humans. And then now we have this other human novel coronavirus called SARS-CoV-2. They are zoonotic. That means they have a reservoir of animals and they can come back and forth between those animals. Rarely do they evolve to infect and stay in human populations. So that's kind of the good news, but they can do that. For example, we saw that with the first SARS as well as Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome. And again, you guys know this, they're named for their crown-like spikes on their surface. And there's actually 4 subgroupings. Most of the ones we'll deal with in the human variety are the beta subgroup of that virus family. So here's a nice photo. You've probably seen this a bazillion times by now, but I do want to point out, as most of you know, viruses are really simple things. They're basically a nucleic acid, in this case RNA, wrapped in a protein, and sometimes an envelope, which is a little lipid material. And then they often will have these lollipops, these surface spikes, different antigens on the surface. The spike protein is the most famous from SARS-CoV-2 because it's what attaches to the receptors of your respiratory cells and allows for viral entry. So that's why it's talked about so much and why they target that for testing as well as vaccine immune responses. This is from the first US case of COVID-19. And just to show you again and to remind our audience that viruses are way smaller than bacteria, way smaller than parasites, way smaller than red and white blood cells. They're down in the nanometer range, 10 to the minus 9th. And so really the only way you see these is through a microscopic image of an electron microscope. And what you're seeing here is a cellular array of organelles. And then they've done a nice stain here to show you this kind of blue cross section across the viral genome. And this is a typical transmission electron kind of image of this virus. I was fortunate in grad school in my master's, as well as working at the Department of Health, to work a transmission electron microscope. And if you've never had an opportunity to do so, it's pretty phenomenal to see things at that level of magnification. So here's a little history about this family and really pointing out these 3 main ones that we've dealt with that has mortality. So the first SARS severe acute respiratory syndrome was in 03. It started in 02, and by 03, it had killed about 1/10 or 10% of about 8,000 people who were infected. So again, a mortality rate of about 10%. You'll notice it kind of hit about 29, 30 countries. And it really kind of petered out. It pops up here and there, but it really kind of fell apart. It never showed up in the US until later. Canada had quite a bit of issue with this when it came out of other parts of the world. MERS, the Middle Eastern Respiratory variety, fewer cases, about 2,500. They're still happening. These still kind of pop up, but it's kind of situated in the Middle East, hence the name, about 27 countries. This one got our attention. So this was in 2012, and it's still kind of percolating every once in a while. It's about a 30% mortality rate. So this one kills about 3 out of every 10. Again, that's a decent mortality rate. That approaches like hantavirus or something like that, 30 or 40% without treatment. And then SARS, of course, SARS-CoV-2, it started out as a novel CoV 2019, and then they renamed it this. And so now I want to show you a very current update up to this week, and some conversation around the ongoing expansion of this pandemic. So look at the world, and you'll notice down here in red, this is through March 31st. So right up to April 1st is when I got this data. If you don't follow or check out Worldometer, I would recommend you checking that out sometime. They have amazing graphing tools and amazing following tools for a variety of things, not just this outbreak, other things. And you'll notice 219 countries and territories. It's basically encompassed the entire globe at this point. About 100, it's right at 130 million confirmed cases. And that's important to remember. As a public health person from back in the day, I'll tell you, you have to remember and tell people when they ask you this, that's an underestimate, right? I mean, that's tested and confirmed. There's probably many more cases of coronavirus and about 2.8 million deaths. This is globally. Again, that's probably in a low ball. It's probably over 3 million or so because of cases we just don't know about. I always like to show this. I've done this talk a few times in different ways, but I think this is also useful. This is the same website. This is the top 10 countries. They list them all, but unfortunately, see who number one is. This is one time when we wish we weren't number one. And you can see the United States now. Again, this is of April 1st, over 31 million cases. We're actually up, I'll show you this in a minute. We're actually up now over 570,000 deaths. And I put this arrow over here on purpose. If you come across the columns, you'll see total test. So if you're watching or you're going to watch in the future, thank you. Look at this. 402 million tests have been conducted in this United States in the past 12 to 14 months. That is unbelievable number of tests that have happened, from rapid testing to confirmatory PCR testing to other types of modalities that are being used. Brazil's right behind us as far as cases go. This is by cases, and India, and then it kind of drops way off. There's a threefold drop once you get to the UK with France and Russia and down the track there. And this is what I say, this is my quote. When I'm interviewed, I say this a lot. You've heard other experts say this. It's kind of sad, right? We have 5% of the global population, but we have 25% of the cases. And that makes me sad as a public health professional for 30 years and as a healthcare medical laboratorian. That's a sad thing to think that your country is responsible for a quarter of the cases in this pandemic due to a number of factors, of course. This is called a heat map. Again, I'll get through some of these maps quickly so we don't get bogged down here, but I just like to show you this. This is a heat map, hot red showing you where the kind of the clustering and the high density cases are. So look at the United States, look at the rest of the world, right? I mean, some places are, this is, over in Asia and China and places like that, pretty high hot areas, but we are definitely encompassed over here. And as you come to the next one, I've done the states just for fun. Texas and California have bounced back and forth, number one, number two for many months. California's kind of stayed in place now for about a month, but we were number one for many months back in the November, January, December timeframe, when things are really out of control. And you can see Texas is approaching 50,000 deaths of our own. We've conducted about 25 million tests in Texas. So, all the states that you kind of heard about, New York had their major issues. Florida is still dealing with some stuff, and others you can kind of follow through here. Again, would encourage you to check out this website, and you can see other states and other counties, even counties. So this is the last heat map I'll show you. This is the United States. And if you come over here to the right, and it shows the top 20 counties by numbers of death, you can see Houston, Harris County is in the top 10. So Los Angeles, is 22,000 deaths. Houston is about 5,600, probably closer to 6,000 now. So just some perspective for what's been going on around the country. And again, from a public health surveillance standpoint, you do want to always talk about, it's important to remember to look at these numbers with the perspective of deaths per 100,000 population or something like that, so that you're taking into account the low density population in other states, right? So raw numbers don't always tell the story. So that's kind of a snapshot of what's happening right now up through this week. I'm going to transition a little bit into some of the risk factors. Again, many of you know these, but I want to talk a little bit about them. There's behavioral risk factors. There's general health, things like, diabetes, obesity, so forth. There's demographic issues around ethnicity and education and access. That we would call these health disparities, access to healthcare, occupational exposure. And then there's biological. Men are a little more likely than women. So if you start looking at gender and age and things like that, certainly no age, the older you are, the more risky that is. I put this slide in with respect to risk because I just like the slide for one reason, but I also like to talk about how much things have really kind of changed. When we first started this pandemic, you might remember the absolute horror in headlines talking about surfaces. And I can't tell you how many interviews and conversations I had with people who were, worried about their mail, worried about their food, worried about their, obviously washing their hands, but just every surface you could think of. Can I shop? Can I get my groceries safely? Can I get my mail safely? Can I get my FedEx packages safely? All of those things were concerning. What we now know through experimental studies as well as epidemiological data is that truly the primary mode of transmission is through airborne respiratory droplets. I'm not saying surfaces are not important. We certainly want to keep cleaning surfaces with EPA and approved disinfectants and watching that, because that helps with all disease when you watch surfaces. But truly, we now know that respiratory and distancing is really a critical piece of transmission. Oh boy, I've talked about this so much. The mask question from the very beginning till now. And without harping on this a ton tonight, we now know, again, through experimental design, numerous studies, as well as epidemiological data, that masks make a difference. Are they perfect? No. If you were able to use an N95 mask or even a fully enclosed respirator like you might do with a level 4 virus, that would be the most protective, up to close to 100%. But we do know that surgical masks, cloth masks, and face shields can eliminate anywhere between 60 and 80% of transmitted respiratory droplets. And viruses, if you don't know, viruses are smaller than respiratory viruses. They're inside that kind of spittle or that respiratory droplet that comes out of your mouth or nose. And so if you're blocking those, you're helping to reduce the viral load in the air around you. And so when both people wear it, like in this first scenario, or a room full of people wear their mask correctly over their nose and mouth and fitted as tightly as possible, the risk goes down. One person's medium risk, no mask, the risk goes up. And then of course you throw in the factor of distancing, right? So the further apart you are, the better that is. And if you're interested, I put a link here. This is a video I did for Texas State that used bacteria as a surrogate to show how well these masks work. Certainly it doesn't show the effectiveness against viruses, but it absolutely shows the protection of how it blocks respiratory droplets using each of those types of masks. I had students come in and do this for me, and we videoed it, and you can watch this if you would like. Just going to avoid that tonight because we don't have the time to throw in another 3-minute video, but if you're interested, you might check that out. We pushed that out to our university population back in, I guess March, something like that, January, February, March. I could spend, again, hours on these, right? Each bullet has really big issues around health disparities. But the data shows, again, the data shows that if you are an African American or Hispanic and some other populations of color, you have 3 to 4 times higher risk of acquiring COVID. Disability is not as high, 1 to 2 times. Other types of disorders, pregnancy, homelessness, again, all of these are linked to your general health, and so there's more risk. And then I've added a bullet. This is from CDC, but I added a bullet of my own. I've been talking to individuals. I've actually done some legal consulting for prisoners. Jails and correctional facilities are a problem. And of course, nursing homes, which is, anything that's close quarters types of situations. But jails is an interesting topic in correctional facilities, because some people look at that and almost will have the attitude of, well, whatever, they're in jail. I don't feel that way. Some people are in there for minor offenses, and they have sometimes no protection. They're crammed into places, and they've had major outbreaks in those areas. So the take-home message, again, preaching to the choir: immunocompromised is the big problem. Super spreader events are real. There has been study after study after study, epidemiological publication after publication about churches, bars, rallies, other places where you're crammed in that help this issue of transmission. So here's a little look back, just to make out some big points here. This is the 3 surges we've experienced so far in the United States. So we had a surge, you might remember, we shut everything down last March, February, March, everything just came to a grinding halt. And then we did have our first surge, about 9.7 infections per 100,000 people in April. We had a second surge around July 19th, that's the peak, about 20.5 infections per 100,000 people. And then we just kind of got through that third wave late October into November, December, with about 23 infections. So that was the highest time. In fact, October 23rd was a single day record at the time of almost 84,000 cases. And then this is just a timeline for you, just real quickly. Right before the presidential election, remember all that going on, we reached a record high in number of daily infections of 100,000. In May of 2020, we hit 200. And you'll notice how quickly these got tighter and tighter. September, 300,000, January, 400,000. And then February 4th of this year, 2021, we recorded our single highest day of deaths, 5,077, plus or minus a few. And you might remember this time, there's quite a bit of press during this time. We had multiple days over 5,000 deaths. And this is where some of the news stories were coming out, where they were sharing, these days have been worse than 9/11. These days were worse than Pearl Harbor. And so now in our top 10 list in the US, quite a few of those are due to COVID, several instances. As of today, from Worldometer and Johns Hopkins, we're right around 570,000 deaths as of today in the United States. Again, that's more than World War II, World War I, and Korea put together. So more than many, many wars we've been in. This is to show you kind of the trend. So this is what's kind of nice happening right now. So this is collected on April 1st. And I just wanted to show you that, we've gotten over this. This is that third surge. And so we've been down. So we're trending in the right direction. Our deaths are down almost 25%. We're right at this isn't good, but 1,000 a day is better than 5,000 a day. And so we're trending downward. And right now we're keeping our eye on, obviously, the variants. We're worried a little bit about opening up maybe a little too soon before we get enough vaccinations in people's arms. Kind of worried about a fourth surge. Some countries are seeing that. They're seeing a fourth surge. I just heard from a Canadian colleague today. They're going on their 4th lockdown as of today. So Canada is having a hard time. They're not getting as many vaccines as we are. This might surprise you. This was as of March 31st too, April 1st. They're cooking up in Michigan and Minnesota and kind of the Northeast. Everywhere else is kind of cooled off. We're not at zero risk, but they're cooking up here. And if you look at this breakdown, so if you have family and friends in these areas, this is kind of concerning right now. 125% increase in a 2-week trend in Michigan, almost 5,700 cases a day. So hospitalizations are up, death and mortality is ticking back up. And so again, this is what worries people in the world of public health and healthcare, when some states and some places are kind of, excited, vaccines are getting better, we're seeing low numbers, but not everywhere. This pandemic has not let go of us yet in certain areas. Okay, another transition, just a few slides to kind of talk a little bit about my experience at Texas State University, because I thought talking to you guys tonight, many of you are in academia. You probably dealt with some of this. I was very honored to be appointed by the president. She set up about 8 work groups of different experts. I sat on the health and safety committee as well as the research committee due to my background. And early on, I'm really proud of Texas State. Early on in the summer of 20, we started looking at these. We brought in Dr. Emilio Carranco. He's our lead medical officer, a physician for our Student Health Center. I was on board, some other public health, epidemiology folks, some nursing, things like that. And these were our 12 health and safety guidelines. So most of these you're aware of. I'm just going to make some points. Each of these critical. We really, when it was controversial, our provost and president decided we were going to mandate masks. And so we mandated masks in the fall and spring. We weren't around in the summer. I was, but the students were, Zooming at that time, and faculty were working from home. But we got permission, special permission in the fall and the spring of this year for our CLS program. And really most of the healthcare programs, nursing and elsewhere, came back in person because we felt we just needed to do that with our laboratories and elsewhere. And as I was mentioning earlier, we found really huge lecture rooms where we could spread out. And we had maybe 3 issues in the last 6 months. We had 1 or 2 students that got COVID, but they reported, they were transparent. We contact traced, they stayed home, and we had no issues in our programs or in our college. So my point here is that masking, testing, and contact tracing works. I've done this my whole life, my whole adult life. Contact tracing works. I've done it with flu. I've done it with hantavirus. I've done it with other outbreaks when I was at the Department of Health. The problem is that it's hard work, and you need boots on the ground, and you need transparency and honesty and reporting. And you just kind of have to enforce it. So it's not easy to do, but we were able to do that in our university population. So really proud of our students and faculty and staff for buying into that. As of early March, Texas State, we became a vaccine hub. We've been doing vaccinations. We also had one this week already. We also have one coming next week. And you can see we've gotten Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, and a couple of times we've got 1,000 more Pfizer coming this week. And we are hoping to do this weekly, if not multiple times a week, to get a large proportion of our university population vaccinated by the middle of the summer, to the point where we hope that we can bring in incoming freshmen in early August and let them get vaccines too, so that we can get them up to date. And here's a snapshot. This is March 31st. We got 88 current cases on campus. You can see this is total across this in the middle from March 1st, 2020. So about a year ago to now, we've had about 2,200 students positive, about 250 faculty, and about 2,400 total. But what I'm not showing you here, because I had to kind of shorten this talk from this standpoint, is that we're roughly around, let's see, I think I have one more slide. Yeah, we have roughly been below 2.5% positivity. This is from last fall. This one bottom right is this spring in March. And you'll see our highest point was like 2.6, 2.5%. Even when we increased testing, we went down. So again, that's kudos to our students and staff and our our custodial staff and our maintenance people that came in and did all the things they needed to do to space students out and clean and change air and put in UV filtrated air units and all sorts of things. So Texas State has done a nice job. So as I transition here a little bit to the next thing, I'm going to just point out that still the best thing you want to do is to avoid the illness, right? To avoid being exposed. So staying out of high areas, high positivity areas is still important. You know, you don't want to walk into the middle of a hotbed of cases if you can avoid it, even if you're vaccinated. So I keep telling this story. You know, I've completed my vaccination series, Moderna. Supposedly I'm 90 to 95% protected. That doesn't mean I can't get it. There's still a 1 in 10 chance. So I know there's risk in life and all that. But until I have a better understanding of this virus and the pathology it does on the human body, I really don't want to get it. And so that's been my constant conversation with people that have different opinions about this. And all of these bullets are important. Interestingly, the distance, they might lower that to 3-ish feet for school children, because they've seen data now that it doesn't seem to be as dangerous as thought as long as you have mask on. And ventilation has really become important. So I haven't eaten in a restaurant since January of last year. I tend to eat outside if I do go places. My wife and I and some friends have been who are vaccinated at this point, but we're in our bubble early on. We tended to go sample barbecue and occasionally breweries, but we always were outside. We made sure they had outdoor facilities before we went, and we stayed away from people. You know, we'd sit off by ourselves. So there are ways to have fun and live your life without totally locking yourself down. Okay. Treatment and therapy review. Again, you've heard of these, but just some updates. Remdesivir is the primary antiviral that was used early on. They're seeing that having a little issue with the variants. So remember, these treatment options were built with the original strains of the virus. So since there's some changing going on, some of these treatments aren't working quite as well. They're still working, but they're watching that. Convalescent plasma is still being used. Monoclonal antibody cocktails. Regeneron, you might remember, is the one President Trump had. There's 2 of them in there. Eli Lilly produces some, and there's others. Steroids, we know, help a lot now because they slow down the inflammatory process and help limit that flooding of the lungs, and even positioning those patients on their stomach instead of their back seems to help with pneumonia prevention and things like that. So all of these bullets are still in play. They're all in the toolbox, but they are looking at new monoclonals and some other new antivirals to try to keep up with the variants. I'll talk about vaccines a little bit later. So what about these variants? What's going on, right? So most of you know this, but this has become a really important conversation with the public, that let them understand that this is a common thing. This is a normal thing. Viruses evolve. It's what they do. In fact, as the virus replicates, the genes undergo random copying errors. We know that as a genetic mutation. And over time, that can lead to changes in the virus. However, it's not always dangerous changes. Sometimes it can lead to actually a lethal issue, and the virus doesn't stay alive anymore when it's infecting cells. So it just kind of depends. And we have 2 types. And again, I know you guys have heard of this: antigenic drift, these kind of minor changes. This is showing the example of influenza. And I'm showing you this because within this virus A, you see these 7 different strands of RNA. So influenza has, there's 8 different, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, 8 different pieces of RNA. And this is what makes influenza problematic. I'm going to compare this a little bit to coronavirus to make a point. And then you'll see what happens over time. This virus over here, it's changed a little bit, not a lot. It's had a little bit of change in one of its RNA segments. And so you get one little change in this lollipop. Notice over here, they're all flat. Now you have a lollipop circular head. That's a surface marker for something like an antibody. And so that antibody will still recognize the original virus, but with that mutation, it's not going to recognize, it's not going to be a lock and key fit. It's not going to fit well. And so that antibody doesn't bind there. But because it's not a major change, it's not a shift, you still have some coverage. Your immune system will still handle some of this problem, right? So it's just not going to bind as effectively. You're going to be less immune to this variant. Doesn't mean completely you're in danger, but you're going to be less protected, so to speak. Now, a shift, that's what we worry about. And I'm still kind of talking about influenza here. Notice on a shift, look how majorly these RNA segments changed in virus or in influenza 2. Lots of changes. You had major surface changes, all new lollipops on the outer surface. This is most common in RNA viruses with segmented genomes like flu, but not in coronaviruses. Coronaviruses has one long RNA genome. It doesn't have segmented components. And influenza likes to reassortment. They like to reassort those segments. So that's why flu vaccines are always kind of an educated guess. They change almost every year in swine and birds and humans. So here's our new virus again, influenza-wise. And what this ultimately means is now the public may only be 20 or 30% protected because it's been such a shift. It's been such a change that some people may still be protected because they might have experienced this type of virus earlier in their life, but others will not have much protection against that. So what does that mean with coronavirus? Well, the good news is coronaviruses do not have segmented genomes and they cannot reassort. So that's good. They don't change constantly like flu. It's made up of one long piece of RNA, but they can occasionally, if they infect the same cell, they can recombine, which is different than reassortment. So if you have two coronaviruses in one human being or one bat or one whatever, they sometimes will recombine and you'll get a new coronavirus. And that's what we think happened with this novel coronavirus, but it's different than flu. So it's, again, it's similar, but it's different than influenza. They don't mutate as often as flu. We also know influenza virus can sometimes jump out of different animals, typically birds and pigs, and jump into humans. We typically call that a species jump. And that can happen with coronaviruses too. And we think, we're still looking at this, we think bats are one of the main culprits. Bats tend to be one of the main culprits for a lot of viruses, unfortunately. So here's the variants and the definitions. If you haven't seen this, just kind of a quick variant 101 lesson here. They've been emerging and circulating around the world since the beginning. It's just now become an issue because we're seeing some changes. Here's bullet 2 is near and dear to my heart because I've been screaming about this, as most people in public health have for 20, 25 years. We don't have the sequence-based surveillance out there that we need. And like every other time that I've dealt with this in public health, we're knee-jerking, we're actively trying to fix the problem. So now we're pouring money and funding into health labs and the universities to try to get our sequence-based surveillance up and going better. At the beginning of this pandemic, we had like 1 to 2% of isolates being sequenced. That's ridiculous. Other countries have 5 to 10%, and we really need it around 10% to know what's going on in the population. So that's getting better. A government interagency made up of CDC, BARDA, Emergency Homeland Security, NIH, and several others created this classification scheme so that we could kind of rank it. Government loves to create things like this, and it's helpful for the public. So we have a variant of interest, that's low level. We have variants of concern, that's a moderate level worry, and high consequences where we don't want to get, that's super dangerous. Here are the variants that are circulating right now in the US. I'll talk about these. These are all variants of concern. Some people would say that when this thing started, that we might have had a variant of high consequence if you kind of retrospectively went backwards because we just had no immune protection for these. Now, I'm not going to read this to you because there's a lot of verbiage here, but just know that the variant of interest is low level. So it's where we're kind of monitoring things. We're not having major death or hospitalizations and all those things. But the ones right now, the variants of concern, there's evidence of impact on diagnostics, treatments, and vaccines. There's some interference with testing. We're seeing increased transmissibility and severity of illness. So that's kind of where we're sitting right now. And we've been here for months. And this is a busy chart, but I just want to point it out to you because you've heard of a lot of these. Here's what's cooking right now. Here's what we're really worried about. This is the UK origin, B117. And I'm not going to tell you all the spike protein substitutions, but that's what's happening. You got all these changes in amino acids that makes the spike protein look different. And so your antibodies don't like it. It doesn't like to bind up to it as well. So we're seeing about a 50% increased transmission of this variant right now. We're also seeing a little bit of increase in hospitalizations and case fatality, especially up in the Northeast. That's where it's really rocking and rolling. The P1 is in the US, and even the P2, they're kind of cousins. That's the one that came out of primarily Brazil, but also Japan. These are not as dangerous right now, kind of moderately, not a lot going on with them, but we're monitoring them. 1351 was the South African origin. That one's showing increased transmission, but not a lot of increased hospitalization or deaths. So still not a huge concern. And then look at this. We have two in California. They originated in the US, right here in California. So when someone tries to name a virus by a country, it's just ridiculous because viruses change and develop all over the world. We do, typically recognize where the origin was, but we try to get away from naming it by a country sometimes. So 427 and 429 are in California. Again, low impact, not a lot of worry, but we're keeping an eye on them. Here's what we don't want. And again, I won't read you this for time's sake, but a variant of high consequence, if you jump down here, you can see the danger, failure of diagnostics, a significant reduction in vaccine effectiveness, all kinds of issues with disease and death, and really messing with therapeutics as well. So just a bad scenario. We really don't want to get there. And it would require a public health emergency of international concern declaration if it wasn't already declared. And right now, there are no high consequence variants in the US or elsewhere in the world. And so we certainly want to avoid that from occurring. And if you go to CDC, you can see what's going on. Again, remember, this is passive surveillance. So these numbers are probably inflated if you really would test more people. But you can see B117 it's actually approaching 7,000 cases now. This was about 2.5 weeks ago. A little over 7,000 cases, about 51 areas, multiple states. There's the South African version and there's the Brazilian version. So we're watching all of these. And just to show you the heat map, so this is 117. You can get all this at CDC. This is the heat map for B117. So Minnesota, Michigan, parts of Wisconsin, some areas over here in the Northeast are really rocking and rolling. Florida is also pretty warm with this one, and Texas and California as well. So we do have some areas we're watching with that one. Not as much with the P1, the Brazilian version, pretty cool map. And the South African variant is also pretty cool, but still out there. It's definitely in circulation. Now this one, this is a busy slide, but as a virologist, here's my geek on right here. I love this slide. A colleague from Public Health England sent this to me. It's not totally inclusive, but it's a pretty freaking good job. This is from 2019, right before things got going in the US, all the way up to February of 21. And so this is like the origin of the pandemic virus. And if you follow this, I'm not going to walk through all of this, but you can see the places where they had them and saw them. And notice the B line strain is the primary lineage here that's cooking. So we got the B line strain, right? Here's the 117, 351, and so forth. So this B line strain is really the primary leader of the pack, if you will, with respect to what's happening with variants and ongoing changes. And now we see some of these P's coming out of these B factors over here as well. There won't be a test after this, Debbie. I know you're excited to see that slide. So here's probably what everybody wants to look at and talk about a little bit. Here are the vaccines in the US. This slide is just a little bit dated, so I'll update it a little bit in some places. So you might remember Pfizer and Moderna were really kind of the first two that popped into the US. These are exciting messenger RNA nanotechnology vaccines, the first of their kind. Really ingenious engineered biomolecules where you have mRNA enclosed in kind of a lipid bubble. You get injected with that. And you might remember that mRNA can be taken up and direct your cells to create S-spike protein. And then your B cells will come into contact with those. You'll have an immune response. Antibodies will be produced. And especially, again, on that second injection, you'll have memory in a higher, tighter dose. And you can see the efficacy here. You've heard these numbers, 90 to 95%. Pfizer just reported about 2 weeks ago, they're showing 6 months of protection so far, and they're still watching it. They're seeing almost 100% protection in 12 to 16-year-olds that they're looking at. I mean, just phenomenal numbers. These are wonderful vaccines. The only difference is that Pfizer's about 21 days apart. Moderna's about a month apart, 28 days. Here's the other on the far right. Johnson & Johnson was the next one we approved. The beauty of this one is it's one dose. So you a one-stop shop, and in 2 weeks you have protection. It is a more traditional vaccine because it uses an adenovirus vector that they've added the spike protein sequence into that vector, and it delivers that into your body when you basically get the virus. It's a non-replicating type of virus with respect to being any danger, but it does infect your cells, and it delivers the mRNA and the protein to start causing a B cell response. And now what it's not here, it's actually been shown now to be about, on first initial dose, it's about 65%. But once you get through the full 14 days, it gets up to about 80 to 82% efficacy of keeping you out of the hospital and severe illness and from dying. And I like to point that out because that is the goal, is to keep people out of hospitals and from dying. You know, you still might get the infection, even though you have a really reduced chance of that, but it should be a mild infection. And so that's really important for people to understand. And then you guys have probably heard about the storage issues. This has helped because over the time that they've studied this, they found that they've actually been able to let some of this sit out longer at refrigerated temperatures. It's actually looking better and better as they study it in real time. All right. Now, one of the comments that I get and one of the questions I get all the time is, you know, how long will I be protected? And my answer is always, you're going to have to wait and see. Right? Because we have to remember, before this pandemic, all of this information would have been gathered in vaccine trials. And that's why it takes 3 to 4 to 5 to 7 years to get a vaccine approved by the FDA. These were approved after clinical trials of, 60, 80, 90,000 people, EUA, emergency use authorization, because we needed to get them into arms to stop mortality. So we don't know how long. It's real time. We're going to have to wait and see. What we do know now is 6 months for Pfizer and probably Moderna, because they're probably going to be very similar. And let's hope it's a year or more than a year. But we definitely know right now that Pfizer is showing about 6-month coverage. And so we'll just have to kind of wait and see. Again, the general public doesn't like that answer. They want every answer yesterday. But we're living in a real experimental kind of phase of ongoing trials to watch this. Children under 16 and for Pfizer and children under 18 for Moderna are being studied right now. So they're running those trials right now. And the hope is that they will be approved for children of different age groups by this summer. And that would be very important as we start thinking about school starting next fall, to start getting children vaccinated. AstraZeneca, you've heard some issues with it. It's also just like Johnson & Johnson, it's an adenovirus delivery, about a 70 to 80% efficacy, so pretty solid. Really being used abroad in the UK and elsewhere around the world, but they had some hiccups. They've had some press that slowed it down when they saw some blood clotting issues, but in reality, it's like 20 cases per 12 million people. So it's actually really, 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 really rare, but it got some headlines. And so some countries stopped using it for weeks at a time. And so they slowed down their vaccine delivery. And that's probably going to be an issue going forward. But the US is looking at this one. We could have a fourth vaccine if they approve AstraZeneca. And you may not know this. This came out yesterday. This is kind of interesting. You'll notice the University of Texas here in the second paragraph. They've got quite a few labs doing different things. Dr. McClellan and his colleagues have looked at now this is all experimental, but they're looking at vaccines that have a modified version of the spike called 2P. And what it's doing here is it's not looking at just 2 little areas of the spike protein, but 6. And so with more coverage, it makes it more unlikely for variants to affect it because it covers more areas. So that's kind of going on. That's kind of interesting. And I was talking about this months ago, and they finally announced it. I'm not surprised at all. Moderna is going to start working on a combination SARS-2 and flu vaccine so that you only need 1 dose, perhaps in the future. Again, this has to go through trials, and this is very early, but kind of an interesting announcement because that could be helpful if you could get 1 shot for 2 viruses. And this is also relatively new. CDC put this out, and the New York Times jumped all over this. And again, this is a what if scenario. So herd immunity, will we get there? Most people think we need to get into that 70 to 80. I mean, 90% would be amazing, but if we can get to 70 or 80, I would be pretty happy. And so if we keep rocking and rolling with adults, remember again, 18 and older are all that are getting this right now, except Pfizer can do 16 and older. We could reach that by July, but you know all the pitfalls here. This means supply has to keep rocking and rolling. And we also have to have people willing to take the vaccine once we get past our early adopters. And we got to get children. We got to get them involved. Right now, over here, if you look on the far right, this arrow, this is of April 4th. The US has almost 19% as of today, fully vaccinated. So Israel's killing it because they adopted early on, and they're almost at 60% of their entire population vaccinated in Israel. Chile is next at 20. And just a quick mention here that they are throwing some money at all these issues. Again, we always like this. My comment on this, and you may have seen me talk about this or post about this, is that I truly believe, I've felt this way for 25 years, public health should be just like the Department of Defense. It should be ongoing, eternally funded. If you look at viruses and other microbes, they have killed more than any war, any terrorist act in the last 100 years, and we don't fund it. It's insane. That's my opinion. I have no idea why we can't get our arms around the idea and our brains around the idea of funding public health when it matters so much to everybody. So maybe this will be a wake-up call. Okay, quickly, Debbie, because I know we got. Okay, so maybe about 10 more minutes.
Because we didn't start till 5 or so.
Oh, there you go. I'm getting time thrown at me left and right. Sounds great. So what's coming next? I get these questions too. So this is, if you didn't know this, if you don't follow the WHO or CDC or public health initiatives, really for the past 30 years, we've been looking at blueprints to predict and think about emerging and re-emerging infections. There's actually a list of these diseases, and they were as far back as early 2000s. But let me show you this list. And this is just updated. This is going way back into the early 2000s. But, we had our eyes on both SARS strains and a call for urgent research and development, right? So we've been begging for funding and other issues around others, including Ebola, the filoviruses, Ebola and Marburg. You know, you've heard of Zika, which is kind of fallen off the radar, and some of these others maybe not, but all of these are very dangerous, nasty viruses. And there's funding for bacteria and other as well, but viruses we tend to keep an eye on because a lot of times we don't have any therapy for viruses. For example, we keep HIV in mind still. We keep tuberculosis in mind. We keep malaria, of course, flu and dengue. They're not really in this list because these examples have their own, you know, kind of devoted funding. Full wings at CDC are devoted to HIV and flu and things like that. So typically those are kind of, you know, they're being taken care of by people. It's the others that we worry about. Another thing, and you guys know this about me, that I'm going to talk a little bit about antibiotic resistance, because I actually believe this is a bigger threat moving forward, is this ongoing kind of slow burning pandemic that we don't talk a lot about all the time. And again, I like to throw these out there in case you haven't heard of One Health. And so trying to get the world, the global public health population to think about animal health, environmental health, and human health. And that equals One Health. And so you really have to look at all three legs of the stool. You have to watch animal health. That's where a lot of these viruses originate from and vector out of. Certainly the environment's critical when you think about clean water and other issues. And watching, again, antimicrobial resistance. So what about Ebola? You know, what's going on with Ebola? You've noticed that there have been a few announcements recently. There's actually an Ebola vaccine they're using that uses the mRNA technology. So they're backing up and starting to work on some vaccines for this. And they've got some vaccines that are showing pretty good efficacy. This goes way back. Again, I'm not going to do a talk on Ebola, but it's been around a while, 40, 50, 60 years now. And you know the story. Ebola is primarily spread through bloodborne exposure. And so it's kind of interesting. I'll talk to people about this. Remember how terrified we were in 2014? We were flipping out when the doctor came back to the US and a nurse, right? And some other people contracted it here. But if you go back and look at this with some perspective of what we're doing right now, really only 2 people contracted it in the United States. You know, most of them came in from other places with it already. And just kind of perspective to think about why, and I'll often say, you know, Ebola actually is a disease, while terrifying, it has a really high mortality rate, 70, 80%. You basically can't clot, you bleed out. And it's, you know, it's a slate wiper. It's deadly, really high mortality. But in comparison to COVID and what's going on right now, it's really not as big a worry when you think about how it spread, because you can control for blood exposure. When every breath you take is, you know, potentially deadly from something like coronavirus, it's a little different. With Ebola, in some instance, if we would have had a pandemic from Ebola, it wouldn't have been as bad, in my professional opinion. We would have been able to isolate that and get control of it because of how we handle our dead, of how we prepare bodies, of how we use proper PPE, and we're careful in healthcare. But COVID was just the nightmare scenario that many of us have been dreading for decades, because it's respiratory spread. It's really difficult to stop the spread of a respiratory agent, as you know now. Again, if you didn't know about CDC and the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, they keep a pathogen priority list. So this is looked at annually. We have high pathogens, we have moderate pathogens, and we have low pathogens. And I'm not going to read these to you, but you can see some of your big players here, like hantavirus and Ebola and Lassa fever and some of these other nasty ones. And some of the mosquito-borne viruses are in the moderate area, like Eastern, West Nile virus, Zika, and so forth. So those we keep close eyes on. And then we have a low group, a lot of tick-borne influenza, rabies, TB, some of those ones we've talked about before. A lot of these now we have treatment for. So it's kind of ranked according to how it's spread, the mortality it has, and can you treat it or prevent it? That's kind of how it falls out. So what's coming next? Something will be coming, even if it's just within a kind of an epidemic or a regional kind of outbreak. We're always concerned about flu. This was from June of this summer, right? So we had we're always watching the swine population and the avian population. The swine is called the mixing pot, and always worried about that next shift in an influenza reassorted virus that has, potential pandemic. Remember, this is what happened in 1918, about 100 years to the date of our last pandemic. So we definitely keep an eye on flu at all times. Here's one if you haven't heard of. I've been watching for about 2 years now. This one is kind of terrifying to me. So far, we haven't had any human problems, but African swine fever, it's a virus, has been just wiping out the pig population in places like Nigeria and other places around the African continent and some other areas. And, I'm just watching it. I mean, it may go away, but again, it's one of these that you take an animal that people are using to eat and they work closely to, like pork, and you've got an agent that's killing a lot of them. I always worry that the human jump is going to happen. And so that's one you might keep your eye on, as well as SARS and others that we're now worried about. And this is actually I use this a lot in writing and in speaking, because this is actually an original image from a publication from Dr. Fauci years ago, decades ago. And I like to show this when I teach microbiology to students sometimes, because everybody in the US kind of thinks that, these diseases come from over there, right? Ebola comes from Africa and Lassa fever comes from Africa and so forth. But look at the United States. Look at all the stuff we have going on over here. And you could add to that now, obviously. This needs to be updated. This is like a 20-year-old map. But human monkeypox and West Nile and Lyme and all kinds of antibiotic resistance issues, hemorrhagic E. coli, crypto. I mean, there's all sorts of issues going on. So it is a global world. It is an amazing travel enhanced world. And, you can get anywhere in the world in one day now. And so these agents can hijack on any individual, any animal, any airplane, any way you transport around the world. And you're that close to something, jumping out into a new area. So just something to keep in mind with respect to globalization of infectious diseases. And so I'll kind of end on this one here on antimicrobial resistance, because I really think that this is the hidden kind of slow burning pandemic. If you didn't know, if you've heard me talk about this before, HAIs, healthcare associated infections from antimicrobial resistant, AKA superbugs, is killing a lot of stuff, right? Lots of deaths. When you look at the data, right now, you have a lot of death across the world from things like multiple drug resistant TB or extremely resistant TB. There are strains now that we can't treat. Vancomycin resistant Staph aureus, VRSA, just on and on. The acronyms go on and on. And so there's a lot of concern with these. And predicting models, this has been published a lot and talked about a lot. I've said this many times. If we do nothing and we kind of let this carry on, by 2050, we're going to see about $100 trillion economic impact from these agents, 10 million deaths, which is about one new resistant infection every 3 seconds. That's about 1 in 25 people that go into a hospital will get one of these. That doesn't seem like a lot, but it adds up when you have the kind of population in hospitals. And look at this craziness. If it's 10 million in 2050, hopefully I'm still alive, right? Well, that will surpass cancer. That'll surpass it'll be the #1 killer not only in the US, but in the world. So this kind of slow burning pandemic is a big thing to keep your eye on as we move forward. So I'll just let this sit here for a second in case we have some questions. But the things I think a lot about over the last year, I mean, it's been a crazy ride, right? From changing the language of Americans to where they talked about things like flattening the curve, and, you know, just they're experts in testing now. Hint, hint, they're not, right? And it's just interesting how everybody has this view and these opinions. But here are my kind of lists that I worry about with respect to prevention and preparation, you know, funding, boots on the ground, who's in the pipeline. When I left the Department of Health and CDC, things were looking good. It was in the 90s. We had 12 or 14 people in rabies and arbovirus. Now they have 4. They have lost so many positions, and when people retire, they don't fill them. They just cut that position. This is scary. I mean, and you're seeing it in healthcare. I know you guys know this is true in the medical lab as well, where veterans with 30 years, 40 years of amazing experience are retiring, and they may not have had the chance to pass on that knowledge to the 30, 40-year-olds. You know, we have a lot of new people, and it seems like we don't have a lot in the middle. So those things worry me. The pipeline, testing, what a year. I mean, what a mess when we kind of first started this, right? Just not being able to get the right reagents, not being, you know, PPE protected, and just the sheer volume of testing. You know, how can you have one hospital that is working people night and day for 14 hours and another hospital furloughing people because they don't have any elective surgeries going on? Just crazy stuff. Thinking about treatments, thinking about expertise in all these areas. Those concern me as we kind of move forward. A couple of pages of references and resources. There's a lot of them out there. Please, as always, use reliable, accurate resources as you think about these things. Some more references and resources. These are more current that I grabbed in the past week or so putting this together. And I'll stop there and see if we have any questions from you guys. Or
Okay, Rodney. Well, one first thing I'm going to do real quick, there is a question from Regina, but I typed it in the chat. Hopefully everybody could see it. The PACE number for the program, which is given tonight, is 013-001-21. And the code that you will need to enter to get your PACE credit, that 4-digit code is 4721. Okay, and it's in the chat, so hopefully you'll see it. If you have any issues and I'd give it a couple of days before you try to log on. Sandra said it would be active by the end of the week. Okay, so Regina, I'll let you unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay, there was a slide that had categories of, was it low, moderate, and high? Was it like risk or morbidity? And it had a list of different diseases. It's from common cold to Ebola. And I didn't see COVID in there. And I was wondering where it was compared to these other diseases.
right.
That
So
we're more familiar with.
are you talking about the CDC category A, category B? Yeah, so right now that is being determined. They haven't updated it for 2020, but I would imagine it's going to be an A or B. That's probably what they're fighting over right now. It definitely won't be in C. Just due to its, and that could, you know, again, it could change if these vaccines become as good as we think they'll become. You know, it could become like an influenza issue and it dropped down to category C because we have a very effective vaccine. But right now, I think because of the mortality issue and the transmissibility issue, it's going to stay at the A or B level.
Okay. You had a good point about how scary Ebola is to us. You know, but as few cases, you know, it's not a day-to-day threat. So that was interesting to put it in reference to other diseases.
Yeah, you know, I don't take it wrong. I have mad respect for Ebola. I mean, I wouldn't want to work with it without the proper facilities and so forth. And certainly if you're in places like Africa and Sierra Leone and other places around the world where they have more problems with PPE, more problems with how they culturally handle bodies and things like that, it is a huge problem and a huge concern. But I just, after dealing with what we've been dealing with, I just don't look at Ebola the same way. With all due respect, I mean, definitely got to take care of it, but I just think in the United States, we're really going to need to be refocusing on respiratory transmitted agents, and kind of hopefully use this, you know, as a launching pad and as a way to really examine what we did right and wrong. There's a lot to look at, including testing for our own field and public health as well. You know, what did we do right? What did we do wrong? Are there ways to think about that moving forward that we can improve on that? And certainly, you know, I will continue to state that one of the most phenomenal things that's happened this past year is the vaccine turnaround. I mean, I am just blown away. I mean, I'm 53 years old and I've done I love history about microbes. So I've looked all the way back, you know, and it's a phenomenal feat of mankind, what's happened during our lifetime to produce these vaccines. And it gives me hope going forward that if we have another agent that is even unpredictable and we have no idea what's coming, we now have the technology, especially with the mRNA technology, to maybe get going within 6 months or 9 months to address it. That's amazing. I mean, and before we'd be waiting years, you know. Imagine if we were in 1918, they had no vaccine. They had to sit around and wait it out. Crazy. You know, you just had to sit there and it's called taking the hit. You know, you just sit there and wait for it to come through you and you hope you live through it. We don't have to do that now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. No one really else has wrote any questions in the chat, but if anybody has a question, feel free to unmute now and ask your question of Rodney. Anybody have a question?
Is everybody tired of hearing about COVID?
No problem.
A little bit.
A little bit, yeah. You know, I'm doing some talks this next couple of weeks. It's like conference season right now, and so I'm at ASCLS Georgia, South Carolina, and Alabama on Friday. I'm doing a rabies talk, and I can't wait to talk about rabies. I'm just, oh man, something different. Even though rabies has a higher mortality rate, I just can't wait to talk about something different.
Well, I guess if that's it, I think you brought up some great points, and of course, a lot of us have, like I have followed you. Renee, do you have a question? I see you unmuted.
More a little bit of a statement.
Okay.
So one of the things, and it's just funny how it's kind of a double-edged sword. So early on, there were so many kind of rapid tests and quick tests that came out of the emergency authorization that, you know, I kind of felt that kind of hindered us to a certain degree, because I think there are a lot of people who were going out and getting these kind of low specificity tests and kind of running out with their negative test in hand and being like, hey, like, look, I'm good, I'm fine. Let me kind of throw caution to the wind. And really kind of to kind of bad effects. So you know, and I kind of still see it now. I don't know if you all see it in your respective cities, but there'll be kind of like small shipping containers, like quick COVID testing, come by 15 minutes.
For $200, right?
Yeah, of course. But you know, it's like I think that like was kind of in the beginning we needed to kind of get a hold of the testing and to be able to kind of put out some results and kind of find out where we stand. But I think we just kind of swung way too much in that direction, where we kind of open the floodgates and let anybody kind of put together a quick test with no real good science behind it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I mean, again, it shows, I think, and people like Duncan and others that have been doing things like this for quite a while probably have something to comment here, but it really puts the light on us, right? I mean, it shows again and again why you need medical laboratory and public health professionals involved in the development and and the running and the monitoring of testing. It's, again, how many times have you heard people talk about false positive and false negatives like they're experts? I mean, it's just a crazy world right now. Everybody, including family members of mine, and I have to kind of, you know, have to sit down and kind of talk with them about the kind of the peculiar areas around that and why it's so critical to understand what's going on, because a lot of people do think that a test is a test is a test. And it's just not true, as we all know. And again, hopefully there'll be some lessons learned and we can use some of this as leverage with our congressional partners and professional organizations. But I keep talking about this with leadership, you know, that we really need to, you know, you know how these things happen. They're hot today and they're gone tomorrow. And I really hope we can leverage this over the coming year to really make some changes, even around issues like licensure and other things. I mean, I think there's a lot of points we can make about the pandemic and why, you know, we need to make some changes across this country, and certainly even within CDC, they need to make some changes and learn some lessons and see what happens going forward. That's my hope, because the damage that's been done, I mean, I had nights where I was almost in tears with what happened to CDC. I mean, it just ticked me off, in all honesty. And I can't go into it really here, but, and you know what I'm talking about. It's just, some of it was ridiculous that was going on. I mean, I know these people, I've worked with them for 25 years and they're amazing professionals and they're dedicated, and still getting thrown under the bus. It's just crazy, crazy time.
Anybody else have any comments or questions?
Debbie, I have a quick comment. Thanks, Rod, again, for your time. It was great. And your comment about maybe the DCLS can also help, that they can be more of a part of bringing us into the fold, and recognizing that we do have that expertise. And so they could be our big advocates to help them at a level that we have not had before. So, but thanks again for tonight. It was great.
Thank you. It's good to see everybody.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's very good job, Rodney. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you. I can't wait to get together, guys, soon,
Yeah.
hopefully soon.
Yep.
Well, I put it on the dates, February 2022, to Mardi Gras in Galveston.
I hope it's before then.
Well, I do too, but I'm just saying, we're going to have a big party for sure then.
Yeah.
So,
Right, right.
I will, for any board members real quick that are on here, I will be announcing that our spring business virtual meeting will be May 1st, Saturday, May 1st. Thank you for doing the survey, and I will send that out tomorrow. But thank you all for joining us tonight, and tell your friends that in a day or two, we'll have the link on the website, and for 30 days, they can come back and listen to this presentation and still get credit. I'll send you all that information. Gilbert is my webmaster. Thank you, Gilbert. Gilbert, I asked Gilbert to do something and he gets it done. So we'll figure it out. So thank you.
Okay. Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
everybody. Y'all
Yeah,
take
good
care.
to see everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Now, Claude, the trick is that I do not close anything, right? Because the recording has to finish. Oh, he's already gone. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. It's great to see you.
You too.
Bye-bye.